talk about the savings rate of 16.3%, we're actually referring to three components of saving. The first one is government. And government saving would really result from tax revenues and then spending. So the net result of tax income and then the expenditure would give you the net savings by government. And as you'll see on the next graph, government likes spending. And at the moment, we're actually in negative territory from a government perspective. So they're not really helping from a savings point of view in the national economy. The second component of savings in South Africa is really the corporate sector. So these are private companies, and very often when we refer to saving in South Africa, we'll refer to the private sector, which will be a combination of corporate SA as well as households. Corporates are often born out of household savings. So these two do go hand in hand. And when we look at the next graph, you'll see that the only significant contributor of savings in South Africa over the last 2 decades has actually been the corporates in South Africa. And then we have household savings. Household savings would be the net result of income minus consumption, and that would be what households would save. And obviously, households would be saving for their own retirement, for goal-based saving, or really as a precautionary measure for some shocks to the system. Corporates would obviously be saving to invest or for maintenance or for projects, and government would be saving in order to invest in social and infrastructure in the country. So these are really the three components. And if we consider saving in South Africa, it's not always helpful to try and have a blanket statement around, savings is poor or savings is good. You have to break it down into these three components. So the first one is really changes in per capita income. And yes, South Africa and South Africans are definitely better off. There has been growth in per capita income, but we're nowhere near our counterparts that we can easily compare ourselves to. So this is probably one of the lowest scores. And again, you need to interpret the score not as a percentage, but really as we are a third of the way to where we need to be in terms of elevating per capita income. Closely related to that, you're going to find growth in productivity. Growth in productivity is really closely related to our competitiveness in South Africa, and without growth in productivity, you can't have sustained elevated income levels. So these two go hand in hand, and you can see the dismal score that we have on that element, which says we're only about 1/8 of the way where we need to be if we want the world to be our customer, as Adrian calls it, and a happy customer. The next one is no surprise. That's the rate of unemployment in South Africa. And really, if this is the root of poverty in South Africa, then this is one of the fundamental issues we need to address. And a lot of work has been done around how we can physically address this issue. And it is my belief that if we start as the private sector to start understanding how we can contribute to investing in business, particularly small businesses, to create jobs, to create sustainable income, that is really one of the biggest things that we can do to try and move this forward. The next one is interest rate structures, which really shows us that higher interest rates will incentivize saving. Obviously, in South Africa, we have relatively high debt-to-income ratios, which means that higher interest rates also negatively affect our disposable income. Nonetheless, it is a factor that will influence savings. Thirdly, domestic credit extension. Our score, again, is not too bad on this front, but really access or easy access to credit will inhibit savings behavior, particularly if that credit is utilized for consumption expenditure, which we can see through some of the unsecured lending numbers that have been coming through where a lot of this is being used for basic necessities. And just a point to make on that change in per capita income and some of the other factors, we say that we as South Africans are spending, and yes, household consumption expenditure is 1/3 of our GDP. However, when you break that down, you do see that a lot of that expenditure is actually on basic necessities, and that a large portion of our demographic in South Africa are low-income households, with 16 million of the individuals in South Africa on social grants, mostly low-income families supported by government for their children. So it really begs the question, can they save? And I think that's one of the fundamental issues that we're only going to address if we can address the employment rate and reduce the dependency on the small proportion of South Africa that's actually employed. About a third of our country is unemployed or not even looking for jobs. That has to have a significant impact on our ability to save as a nation. The next two are really around dependency. There's a percentage of the workforce in South Africa that are obviously looking after the young and the elderly, and here are really our dependency ratios, and you can see in this finding that really we have a higher young age dependency, and from an old age dependency, we're actually ahead of the pack from that perspective. Uncertainty will also drive saving, and when you go back to a few graphs, you will actually see after 2008 there was also an increased saving in the corporate sector, where the obvious behavior is that if there are uncertain times, people tend to hoard a bit of cash for precautionary saving. That will happen in both households and also in the corporate sector. So the level of uncertainty in the market will play a role. And then urbanization rates. Interesting to note that urban areas or rural areas will actually save more because of the uncertainty involved in their lives. When you move into the city, people are actually tend to spend a bit more because the shopping mall is right next to you. Numeracy rates, and this is one of the things I'm quite passionate about. I really think financial literacy is one of the biggest areas we need to give attention in this country. It's not about basic education necessarily. It is about people's understanding of finance, which leads to an understanding of credit, appetite for credit, and whether you would rather save or understand which vehicles to save in. So really, numeracy rates is a proxy for financial literacy in this example.